Welcome to Directionally Correct, a People's podcast with Cole and Scott.
Today's guests, Gordon Schmidt and Sai Islam.
Thanks to our sponsors, Worklytics. Generate actionable insights from work data while protecting your privacy using workplace analytics with our partners, Worklytics.
I know women do that. Like they'll take your like large t-shirts that you would never wear and like use it as a sleeping shirt.
Yeah, it's a sleep shirt. Yeah. Well,
Today's episode of Fashionably Correct.
Yeah, for real,
Directionally
right?
Correct.
Well, I mean, like we have some like semi-breaking news, and I know like Cole is like devastated by this news. He talks about it quite often, but
nope.
We got sad news that the Iron Sheik has died.
Oh, I saw that.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of hot
Hulk
takes
Hogan
you guys
took him
got?
out, I think, if I was correct.
Went to his hospital room.
Hulk's done a lot of bad things, but this is the worst, probably. Killing the Iron Sheik.
I
Taking out
don't
the
know
Iron
what that
Sheik.
is. What is the Iron Sheik?
He is a Iranian wrestler from 1980s, and he like represented like all the Middle Eastern bad guys that the U.S. was fighting during that time. Not like the honorable Mujahideen fighters of Rambo 3. So the opposite of that.
Another thing I haven't seen.
You haven't seen Rambo 3, Cole?
I've seen the original Rambo. I've never. I didn't go that deep. I didn't get that deep cut of the third Rambo.
I'll just basically look at pictures from the late 70s and 80s of who's meeting with the president, and you'll see them, spoilers, later on, starting Al-Qaeda and things like that. So
Well, I learned something today.
the enemy of my enemy ain't necessarily my friend next week. You know, that's what you find out.
It depends if they have oil or
Good,
not,
good.
right? We'll kick it off with some introductions. So here we got Dr. Gordon Schmidt, professor of management at the University of Louisiana-Monroe. I know that Cole has some thoughts on that. He studies researches leadership, future of work, and management education. And Dr. Sai Islam, co-founder and vice president of consulting at Talent Metrics. They have some fantastic t-shirts, which I've seen floating around SciOp. So also associate professor of IO Psych at Farmingdale State College. Together they've written a book, Leaders Assemble, Leadership in the Marvel Comic Universe. I met both these guys at SciOp at a Star Trek meetup, and there's like great dudes overall. How's it going, y'all?
Good.
Doing well. Yep.
Good. Going to a lot of Star Trek meetups lately. So, just one of many, Scott.
Well, as we learned, there's lots of IO in the Star Trek universe, right? There's lots of different things to explore, and we can get into like the Marvel comic universe as well. But
Star Trek
Podcast
is,
on that
is
topic,
great.
I think. Right?
Yeah, the Star Trek is really great for leadership and also for like other IO topics, I think. And Gordon, aren't you a big like tech guy? Don't you love thinking about the technology with the Star Trek folks?
I'm against technology. Luddite. You won't catch me on Zoom. No, the technology I think is interesting. I think Star Trek is very focused on when it was made, when it's supposed to be the future. So it's all like dials and people handing each other physical book Kindles, basically.
like some of those like show like a actual printer, like I'm sure, which was like freaking mind blowing in the 60s, right?
Yeah, the tech is an interesting part, thinking about what the tech means.
But even like we could transition back into like the Marvel universe, where I know Cole has like more of an orientation there, but like your book is great. Like I thumbed through it. You got issues like a shared leadership, mentorship, conflict, authenticity, female leaders, like all this sort of stuff, which is going to be on the forefront soon if it's not already here. I'd love to get you guys' take on what led you to do this and how's it going?
So, as I tell everyone, make sure to follow listservs. Listserv was a key part of this because we got an email out to either the HROB listserv that says, hey, there's a new book series at Emerald. It's exploring popular culture, exploring leadership through popular culture. Is anybody interested in doing a book? Submit a proposal. So I emailed Sai and said, hey, we should do a book with this series. Sai said, I haven't even written a book chapter before. And I was like, don't worry about it. Let's do it. And so basically we thought Marvel would be a really good fit for this particular type of setup. Everybody knows Marvel. I was going to say everybody's got an opinion. I was going to say everybody loves it, but I think maybe now everyone's got an opinion. But it's also got a lot of those leadership issues built in. Sai and I have done quite a bit of research and talking and, I don't know, yelling into the wilderness without anyone listening about trying to make IO more accessible, trying to help us test what's going on in businesses versus not believing in stuff that's been going for 30 years that we won't test or try to understand. And so to us, the book is kind of fits into our outreach efforts. It's a lot cooler than most of our outreach efforts, just to be fair, because more people like Marvel than discussing the need for IO to test business practice. That's kind of what got us on that path. Sai, you've got any other secret origin parts of it?
Well, the real secret origin is that the two of us have been using pop culture in our teaching, and then I've been using it in some of my coaching work, just because it's a way to connect with people, and that's one of the hardest things for, I think, IO psychologists in general to do, because we probably think in terms of like a journal article. We're like, well, let me start you with the introduction. 1946.
Yeah.
So and so did this study, and now let's talk about today. But this stuff is it really lets students and executives and just regular people connect with the material in a way that is fun and kind of easy to think about. And it's right there in the movies. A lot of times when we're talking about some of our concepts, it's harder to wrap your head around them, and how those concepts might work. And also sometimes, especially in the consulting side of things, it can be really sensitive for people. Like if you're talking to a leader, you're like, hey, let me tell me about your problems. And maybe they don't want to talk about their problems, but they can tell you how Iron Man is doing badly. And there's like no emotional cost to that, right? There's no sense that, oh, I feel terrible now about that. Whereas, sometimes that happens with coaching clients or in leadership courses where you're talking about that. And then for students, sometimes they have zero leadership experience. They don't have a sense that they've been a leader. Even if they're leading like a student group, they might not imagine that, but they can see that with Captain America, that, oh, this guy's leading. And so that's always been one of the things that we've noticed in that ability to communicate IO is, can we actually get it to a place where regular people can think about it, connect with it, and then take those ideas and maybe actually run with them?
Do either of you have like a really good illustrative example of a leadership encounter in any of the Marvel movies that is kind of your go-to that you cite in the Leaders Assemble book?
Gordon, you got one? Because
Sure.
I think we each have our favorites, right?
Yeah, tell your favorites.
I would go with, so I have a go-to that I use a lot when I talk about the book, just because I think it's easy to talk about and to imagine. And I usually talk about Captain America as a servant leader. And when you think of a servant leader, you think of somebody who's literally going to jump on a grenade for their team members. And he does that in the first movie. And he does it when he has zero superpowers. It's like before he gets his powers, he jumps on a grenade. And that never changes about Steve Rogers, right? It never, he's always the person that's trying to create a situation where people will, succeed or be safe. And that's always the number one thing for him. And I think it's a great illustration of what we imagine a servant leader to be like. And especially, for students or in some organizations where they don't really do servant leadership, I find that it's very helpful for leaders to kind of think about that example and to reflect on it.
Yeah, one that always comes up for me is Captain America Civil War. And so you've got this fight with the Avengers fighting with each other about how the Avengers should be run. And so there's this idea that, Iron Man is saying that, there needs to be safeguards. We're too powerful without being checked. We need the UN to sort of run this. Or General Thunderbolt Ross, which him running it seems like a horrible idea based on everything I've ever heard. But theoretically, it's the UN's going to run this. It's going to be civilians, right? And so Cap is like, no, our ethics and principles matter the most. We've got to make our own call, right? And so you might have a different feeling about which one's correct if you just are given the basic argument. But the important part for me is that the failure to engage in negotiation or conflict management, right? Is you've got these two perspectives. They're not that well defined. And we haven't really gotten at the core of the issues. So does the UN have to run it just like Tony says, or does the Avengers have to have full latitude like Cap says. They don't. We could have the UN could help with some elements, or members could opt out if it doesn't fit with their values, or we could have input or oversight in different directions, right? And so they've got this conflict that if we had gotten to, instead of fighting over it, but it went to collaborating and really understanding our own interests, the Avengers might not have had to broken up. And speaking about leadership in that scene too, is it's Cap and Iron Man fighting on this, right? What is everybody else's opinion? They don't really try to solicit that. There's no vote, there's no democracy, there's no real attempt to get other views. It's just my way or the highway. And so ultimately people pick Cap or they pick Iron Man. But there wasn't really a need for this if they had really worked through what do they really care about. And to some degree, it's one of the most tragic situations in the movies of bad leadership, right?
Mhm.
Because the Avengers break up, it affects, to my mind, their ability to fight Thanos and all these things. When if the Avengers are kind of broken up for a very long time in this universe because nobody could compromise or no one could really figure out how can we work together on this. And the Avengers are a team of these individuals, strong opinions, strong skills, different perspectives, and we need to find a way for people of different backgrounds, different perspectives to work together, not my way or the highway. And so I think it's a good idea to show it not working, them not doing a good job.
I think that is fantastic. You guys are definitely way more, way deeper versed in the Marvel universe than I am. But kind of at the surface level, I'll reiterate the point that you guys are digging into things that I think are going to be on the forefront coming up as organizations slim down, everything gets flatter. You have more sorts of leaders controlling either large swaths of team or something I don't see particularly well communicated in the leadership literature is this self-directed teams. How do Fantastic Four, how do they assemble? But you guys cover it. Any thoughts on where leadership is going, what we're going to see, and how we can use these principles to produce better leaders in the future?
Well, I'll cite something that Gordon wrote about virtual leadership,
Always
right?
good,
So
always good to hear.
Schmidt et al, or so I actually think the ability to lead without being in the same physical space is going to be really important. Even
it's a new
though,
skill,
even though companies are like, please come back to the office. We've already paid rent for this office space. Please come back. The ability to do both, where you're in the physical space and then you're also in the virtual space, is I think a really key skill, especially if the trend towards remote and hybrid work continue in the direction that they are. It's funny, Scott, you mentioned the leadership literature talking about things there are too many models, right? There's too many approaches to leadership, and some of the more interesting stuff about leadership substitutes or even shared leadership, I don't know if it gets studied enough or effectively enough. So I definitely think that that idea of virtual leadership and being able to kind of manage things without being there is going to be really key.
It seems like the leadership literature kind of boils down to just don't be an asshole, right? Treat the respect, set task, obviously do this leadership stuff, but be kind to your fellow man, right?
Well, yeah, I think Gordon and I joked about this, right? That a lot of leadership research, we can break it down into two areas. One is task orientation, can you get the people to get stuff done, and then are you able to manage the social part of it? Gordon, I think you wanted to add something.
Well, that Schmidt research is great from what I've heard. But I do think, I'll get to another topic in a moment, but I do think a lot of work can be done virtually, can be done fine that way. And that's something with the research that we do and people we collaborate with is Cy and I talked at, I think, SciUp 2019, and then we didn't see each other in person again until 2023, this year's SciUp.
Wow.
During those 4 years, we wrote multiple papers. We wrote the whole book. I sent him comic book images all the time on Twitter, making fun of stuff I was reading. Our friendship developed and strengthened. All these things happened while we were not physically together. And I think the tools are there to do that. Our ability to connect exists, but we actually have to think about it and understand it. Because if we don't, then it doesn't work, because a lot of that is leadership virtually means not leadership. Just you get an email every once in a while, or you find out you got laid off by
Right.
email. You log in. If you can't log in, either you forgot your password or you no longer work at Twitter. You know, that's how it works. And again, that's all really bad leadership. It's bad ways of organizing things. But there's a lot of bad face-to-face leadership, frankly. There's a lot of that as well.
Oh yeah,
Being-
historically, yeah.
yeah, being face-to-face doesn't fix everything. And I think that that's the panacea these companies are looking at is, oh, out of COVID, they're not as motivated. So if we bring them into the office, they're going to suddenly like look at the beanbag chair and say, I love everybody. They're going to start playing ping pong again. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And that's what, the solution is not, we need people physically here. It's that we need good leadership. We need intentional leadership. I think that's part of it. I do think, that idea of shared leadership or working together, trying to get rid of this idea of the CEO that does everything is a big problem, because the people we worship in popular culture and bios, people like Steve Jobs, which I mention all the time in these podcasts, is we act like Steve Jobs did everything. Well, Steve Jobs didn't do everything. He looked cool in a turtleneck and sounded like he knew what he was doing, but a lot of the computing was done by other people. A lot of the work was done by other people. He just was that figurehead guy who made it sound cool, right? And who got that mystique. I think we have the same thing with Elon Musk, right? We all were supposed to think Elon Musk was a genius until he decided to keep tweeting really dumbly and reduce the value of Twitter by, 75% in a few months. And now we're like, maybe he wasn't as smart as we thought, but he had the image of leader looked very well for him. He's rude and crude, but he knows what he's doing. Well, as it turns out, only the first two are true. The last one certainly ain't true for Twitter. And so trying to appreciate middle managers, appreciate people that aren't the manager, but help engage in leadership. That's what we need to do a lot better. So I don't know whether we need to just throw out the term leader, frankly, and just talk about people working together. I know manager is kind of a dirty word. In the 80s, we sort of got rid of supervisor because that sounds bad. Leaders got a lot of the same issues, potentially. I think it describes something important, but talking about leadership more, or even just people working together is better in many circumstances than, I need the big CEO that's going to fix all our problems. Big CEO might cause a lot of our problems. Fix, I'm not sure on.
No, I think you might be onto something there, Gordon. And going back to kind of something Sai was saying for a second, Scott and I joke sometimes that, I think I'm the task orientation of the podcast and he is the social orientation. So we kind of balance each other out in those ways. But I really struggled for a while to think, like, does leadership even exist? And really what I settled on is and this is why there's thousands of models of leadership and what is it and what is good leadership, what is bad leadership. And the thing I kind of settled on is that the only thing that exists is followership, because the only thing that makes a leader is whether or not other people listen to them and follow them. Right. And that's a definable behavioral characteristic that you can actually measure. I don't know. How do you all react to that? And does that kind of stuff matter within the context of the book that you wrote, or just your outside research on leadership or your coaching practice or whatever? And maybe Gordon, maybe you go first, and then Sai, you can follow up or something like that.
Yeah,
Very task oriented, by the way, Cole.
To get organizing. But I agree in a lot of ways. I do think followership is a good way to look at stuff. But to some degree, to me, if we look at leadership correctly, it encompasses followership, because leadership is influencing other people, getting them to change their attitudes, their behaviors, their what have you. And when you have a good relationship between people, whether they're leaders, whether they're followers, we're influencing reciprocally people back and forth. So being a good follower to some degree is engaging in good leadership. in a lot of ways. I think followership is one way to sort of flip the narrative of how we talk about it. But I think if we define leadership, the process, well, we're kind of talking about followership in a lot of that case. Because right, it's your followership skills aren't just, oh, I'm really good at doing what somebody else tells me to do, which I think sometimes that's what followership sounds like. And so from that perspective, I do think part of it is us trying to embrace reality in some ways of how things work. We all engage in influence tactics on others, right? We're all trying to influence others, but I think influence is a bad thing, right? That's just marketers trying to trick us.
That's a really, really good point. Like, you not only to be a good leader, you have to like, set tasks and this sort of thing, but there's a citizenship behavior on the leader followers' part to take that direction and run with it, be engaged.
Yeah.
Which we don't talk about that often.
And the influence is both directions. So I have that as an academic leader. If I tell people, oh, we really need to do this thing or this way, and nobody wants to do it, well, they're going to influence me to reframe it or recommunicate it, or instead of an email, I go to Cy and say, hey, buddy, remember how we work together? Do this thing, right? And that's kind of what we have to do, right? Is influence bases of power. I think power is that other part where we think power is bad, but power is just having various things that help you to influence other people.
Yeah.
And so if we just talked about people more in terms of your ability to influence others, your ability to have power. So knowledge is power, expertise is power, relationships are power. And these things, if you have them, you are often engaging in leadership by influencing other people. But instead, if we call it your manager tells you this, it's okay, because managers, it's okay for them to try to convince people of stuff. It's okay to call, if somebody's a leader, they can push people to do stuff. But if we as individuals talk about, oh, I'm trying to influence you, or I'm trying to build power, we think, you're like, like an evil queen in a Disney movie or something, right? You're an evil dictator. But that's the same thing is true for organizational politics, right? Is we think, ooh, it's bad. It means that bad people are winning. But in a lot of cases, to get things done, you need to have relationships with people, right? You need to be able to convince people of what's the right course. And so I think if we really embrace a lot more of power, influence, politics, we're all engaging in leadership through those things. We don't need it designated. This dude's the one who makes the decisions because he's got a title. And most of the time it's a dude, right, that we put in this who looks like a leader in our implicit theory of what a leader should be. Some old white dude who has sage wisdom that is going to do a good job, right? And I think a lot of that, when we don't think about the components of leadership, we get into these even more theories of who deserves it, or we just need somebody with all this power that's okay. When it's us influencing each other, it's us developing power, it's us engaging in politics. That's really how stuff gets done, to my mind.
Oh, so actually, one of the most important things I think Gordon talked about there was this idea of power, right? Like, we conceptualize leadership in the book as influence. And so influence, since it is a two-way street, the followers have to acknowledge that you are actually a leader. Like, we've all been on teams where there was a manager that nobody respected, nobody thought much of, and nobody really listened to. And so a lot of times when we're looking at organizations, we tend to look at and we say, hey, what's the formal org structure? And here's where the power lies. Here's where the node actually is. But in reality, those, French and Raven's bases of power, expertise, respect, all of those things, they matter. And so followership is important, but it's also important to know that a leader can actually activate those different areas of power. So sometimes you need to be able to say, like, hey, this is my job title. I have reward power over you, and you need to do what I'm asking you to do. Other times you've got to be like, well, I have more knowledge, or I'm not sure if I should be the one to tell you this. Maybe we need to reach out to someone else. And so that is leadership in a variety of different ways, right? So when we talk about what leadership is, what followership is, it really is that social process. And moving away from the idea that people that have formal titles are the ones that are leaders by default kind of frees us up to talk about more of these influence tactics and to kind of look at things in a more holistic way. And I know, Scott, you were talking about that idea of shared leadership. A team that has shared leadership only functions if they can switch on the leader hat and the follower hat, effectively. Like, okay, I'm, Star-Lord is leading us this time. Oh no, now it's Rocket's turn. Now it's Groot. So each of these characters, each of these people, they need to be able to switch off from being, oh, I'm following at this point, to no, my expertise or my knowledge or my ability or whatever is going to lead us in that situation.
Well, like analogously, like you see this in sports as well. So like you got like I know, Si, you're a big basketball fan. Like the leadership style, like Greg Popovich is far different than say like Avery Bradley or something like that. Like what lessons can we take away from sports, be it either IO principles in general or leadership, that we can apply to other contexts such as consulting or what have you?
I was going to just say, related to that shared leadership part too. I think there's also teams being willing to, of course, seed leadership, but also who can help in the moment. And I think this plays into sports. I think it can connect to Star Trek as well, honestly, which is, if your star player is sick or injured or out of energy, do you have somebody who can fill that role or come in, or how does the team work differently without, with Michael Jordan on the bench, right? And that's something I don't think we think about often enough is, who's got the energy, who does that? And that was always something I think in Star Trek, I wondered about is, is Picard the captain 24 hours a day? Or are we seeing like the primetime crew, and then at night, a lot of stuff happens, but it's Joe Wilson's
After
in
hour
charge
shift.
or something.
I
right?
love it.
I'm
we see
not
a little
ready
bit
for
of that
Star
stuff, like
Trek
Lower Decks
nights.
now, but
You had
they
lower
had a couple
decks.
episodes. But like what's the work like? Just if you think about that with Division of Time, even, or like a factory is like, you can't have the factory foreman 24 hours a day. You need the shift leader each time. You need somebody who's ready for all that. You need that in Star Trek because Q comes at night sometimes and hangs out with Joe Wilson. We don't know, but we just focus on the
Oh, that's
hard during his 8-hour
fantastic.
shift or whatever, right?
Well, like on like a submarine, you'd have like the night crew, right? They hot bunk
yeah.
and this sort of stuff, and like you got like perhaps a totally different employee experience.
Yeah, so Star-Lord needs a nap. Somebody else might need to do the Star-Lord thing, right?
Maybe.
That's real life, right? You can't work
Mhm.
24/7. Sometimes they want us to do that, but you can't do it, right?
Gordon, we're academics. We can't admit that we can't work 24/7. There's no way to stop that onslaught.
Some people don't consider this work for some reason.
Yeah. But to go back to your question there, Scott, in terms of things you can learn from sports, so I think one thing that organizations have learned that I wish they didn't learn from sports is a lot of organizations think that they're managing their team like they're in a championship game. And they're like, I need real-time results and I need to make the decision in the fastest possible fashion.
Yeah.
And I often wonder, like, are you really on a shot clock here? Are you on the 24-second shot clock with your team? Probably not. So maybe, taking a moment to think through things and to consider things more deeply and to be smarter about things is probably a better bet than just saying, well, I need this real-time data so that I can make the fastest possible decision that I possibly can. I think being more considerate about what the workload looks like and when decisions have to be made is, I think, really, really important. And there's a big difference, for example, in like a baseball game versus something like basketball, or sport that moves more slowly, or a sport that moves faster than another. And I think that a lot of times businesses, they look at sports and they're like, what, everything in sports is fast and we got to be just as fast and be faster than everybody else. And I'm like, you don't have to necessarily be faster. You just have to make better decisions. But I think that one of the best things you can take away for your workplace, whether for-profit business, nonprofit business, from sports, is actually just defining what performance looks like, right? How many organizations have you work with, and you're just like, what does good performance look like? Well, if I'm happy, then performance is good. Really? That's what it is. But you can see in every role in a team, you've got a sense of what's the ultimate outcome, what does good performance look like, and a lot of organizations, a lot of orgs don't really know how to define that, and that goes back to, as IOs, we were like, let's do a job analysis, let's figure out how this works, and let's see how you get those outcomes that you want in your company. You're never, or in your team, you can't get away with not knowing what people need to do on the squad. So for example, like one of the things that happens when you get a new coach is all the players are like, oh, that guy, the new coach, told me what I had to do, and that's great, and I'm really happy about that, because many times they don't know what they were supposed to do. So explaining that to team members is really important, and then your analytics, your data, they're going to roll up to whatever outcomes you're looking at based on what you've determined to be variables of interest. So if you're able to do that, we know sports teams can do it for the most part, or in some cases they don't know how to do it. If you're the New York Knicks, they don't, or the Mets. Yeah, they don't know what they're doing. They're just throwing money everywhere.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, like, sports is great because you also get like these negative cases. You can see what the outcome is for people you did not select, for, you didn't put this guy into the game, etc. But like, going back to what you're saying about moving slow, I know that Cole has like some hot opinions on Louisiana, where things move about as slow as could possibly be.
Well, so I don't know if you all listen to the podcast, but in our last episode we recorded, which isn't out yet, we talked a little bit about Johnny's Pizza. And Gordon, knowing that you live in Monroe, Louisiana, which is the birthplace of Johnny's Pizza, I just wanted to give you a blank check to write, what do you think about Johnny's Pizza? What's going on in your world, and let's pimp ULM a little bit. When I was a kid, it was called NLU, but that goes in the way back machine a little bit. But yeah, what do you think about Johnny's Pizza?
It's definitely pizza. That's a positive of it. It seems okay. It's not super exciting. They didn't have this. They had to sweep the bayou recently.
Oh, yeah. They moved on from sweep the swamp to sweep the bayou.
Or maybe it's sweep the swamp, which
it's sweep the swamp. It's sweep the swamp. Yeah,
which I felt could have been better. I was very excited by all the crap on it, but it in fact did not gel appropriately.
I'm dying on the inside.
Cole has like a nostalgia for this. Like I think he just like grew up with it. Like
I think the pizza's okay. Like I like it all right. I've had it at some events. Oh, we've had the party pizza pack set up.
Yeah, they don't call it that either, but that's okay.
What do they call it?
The party pan pizza, I think is how they call it. But anyway,
the description I heard of it was they just have half the toppings because it's for children.
That's such a cynical take on Johnny.
That's what I was told. I'm not.
I think it's totally accurate.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, what is your favorite Monroe eating location, if you have one?
I like the Warehouse. I like Waterfront Grill. Riverside Coney Island is very good.
There you go. Those are good. All good. Scott likes Riverside as well.
Coney Island, yeah, good place. Yeah.
So you're redeeming yourself, Gordon. I'm not completely depressed now.
And Sides over here, like, I actually have access to good pizza. Like, what the heck?
Everything outside of New York, New Jersey is illegitimate pizza. Even Philadelphia. It's like I can't. That's not real pizza to me.
Well, so let's talk about pizza. Si, where are you located, and what is the good pizza that's there?
So I'm out in Long Island.
Okay.
So suburbs of New York City. So really good pizza is in the city. I'm low class, so I like any dollar slice. So I think
okay, that's what I was gonna ask. Do you like the dollar slices? Those are always my favorite when I go to Manhattan.
Yeah, I like dollar slices because the rats like them, and so I also like them. But if you're really looking for something that's a little more higher quality, Grimaldi's in Brooklyn is a pretty classic place to go. There's a bunch of famous Rays, some of which are original famous Rays. They're just names of places that you can hit up. And then in Long Island, there's a place called Little Vincent's, if I'm remembering the name correctly, in Huntington. That's kind of a late night favorite. It's kind of a unique pizza, but
what's unique about it?
I think the type of cheese that they use. I should be better at this because a good friend of mine is a huge pizza snob and like forced me to go on a pizza tour of northern New Jersey.
You need to try Johnny's, is what I'm hearing here.
Well, I'm
Well,
going
come
in 2
visit. We
weeks.
got
The first
bayous
place
and
I'm hitting up is Johnny's. I will go there before I even get to my destination.
You get a daiquiri first, though, or just
So, okay.
Oh,
Okay.
there
You
we
want to
go.
lean into this?
There we go.
Because
Yes.
I really want to lean into this. Okay.
Okay, sounds
So, best daiquiri place is by the ULM campus. And the best thing to order from there, which I think we can say on the podcast, is called a Smurf Piss. Have you ever had a Smurf Piss, Gordon?
No, I have not yet. I've got to give it a shot. It sounds like.
Okay, it's Oasis. It's right near ULM's campus.
Okay.
Best
Yeah,
drive-through
that's-
daiquiris out there. I don't know. Are you a drive-through daiquiri guy, Scott, or-
Drive through daiquiri. Listen to this. So you get in your car, you get in. There's like the size of your head of daiquiri of liquor, essentially, and you just drive down the road.
Look, people don't understand. Louisiana is like a different country. It's like
yeah.
there's different laws. Everything that's acceptable other places or is not acceptable other places is acceptable in Louisiana. It's amazing.
Liquor at the CVS. I mean, like
Yeah.
it's
I
different.
feel like they
world.
have that other places though, don't they?
I thought that was Las Vegas, though. I thought Las Vegas was
Yeah.
the place where you could do things that were not acceptable anywhere else.
It's just the flashy version of Louisiana style. You know? how
Oh,
they do
really?
stuff.
Okay.
It
Las
is.
Vegas is exciting. There's no bayous in Las Vegas, man. I learned what a bayou was. I thought it was like an evil swamp or something. But we get our drinking water from a bayou, so hopefully it's fine.
Oh gosh. Oh Lord, get an amoeba or something. I think is you're gonna go to the nerdery.
Sure.
I think Cole. I think you ought to kick us off here because you probably have the best sort of story.
Yeah.
here.
So I was super excited about talking about this until I read it and then I got sad. But so there's this IT worker who's been on sick leave for 15 years and he's suing his employer, which happened to be IBM, I think in the UK, to about raising his salary, like giving him raises while he's been out of work for 15 years. And the judge threw out the case. And in the ruling, before I get to the part that's sad, in the ruling, the judge was like, you should just be happy they've been paying you for 15 years without working. This shows an incredible generosity of an employer and the employee kind of whole lattice of benefits that employers are obligated to provide. The thing you find out later on in the article is the guy has actually had, cancer for 15 years. And you're like, oh man. And like, I can imagine had he had cancer and like, let's say they canceled his employee benefits, he probably wouldn't have been able to pay for it because he hasn't been able to work this whole time. I was like, oh man. So I started to kind of see the other side of the story. The headline was a little clickbaity, but I was pretty keen on talking about this guy who hasn't been paid in 15 years. Did you all get a chance to read this?
I skimmed it. The headline doesn't really do the story justice.
It doesn't.
It doesn't really explain this person's situation. But as a general rule, we know employees are usually, especially in the United States, are underpaid, especially given current levels of inflation. That's usually my hot take that organizations don't like hearing. Is I keep telling them, like, you got to pay people more. The only thing I tell my students is like, just ask for more money because I'm pretty sure the company has it. You don't have to be shy about that. But I'm glad that they were, I'm glad he got some payment, especially because if he's been suffering from cancer for the last 15 years, he needs some support beyond just, we hope you get better.
It does feel, you read the headline, you're like, oh God, the balls on this guy is immense, right? But it does kind of like pose the question, like, what is the obligation of an organization to an employee? Like, how far do those benefits go and for how long? I mean, the employee is there to do work to benefit the overall organization, and a organization cannot provide all of the life benefits to an employee, i.e. like social relief and blah 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 blah. How far should it extend for the organization?
Yeah, well, I also think it's a question of what's your social safety net in your country. So it seems like if somebody's sick, the country being more involved in it or those benefits. But I think that's actually one of the bigger issues in the U.S. overall is stuff like universal health care provided by the government means that you don't have businesses getting involved in complicated costly and stuff that they're
Yeah.
not well equipped for. That's the issue with a lot of businesses, is that stuff like insurance is a gazillion dollars and it's not really feasible for them to do it. And like a lot of insurances suck a lot based on my experience, even with universities that have relatively good comparison wise. And so to me, that's part of the issue, is like businesses become the social security net for so many people, as well as they have to make these choices. So what, IBM is going to kick the guy with cancer off benefits? Like, how bad is that going to look?
Right.
That's a much worse news story. Like, this news story makes it sound like that guy's a bum, but the news story of we fired people with cancer, we did that, also looks bad. I would prefer that some of this stuff gets taken care of, through taxes, through our government. Then you have businesses have to have these crazy decisions of which they're not equipped for, and their stockholders being beholden to stockholders and also being beholden to the good of society in so many ways is pretty hard. Like, capitalism's hard, man.
It's so
That's why
weird
we
that
need
like
support
your
for
health is tied to you having a job, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's
It
interesting.
shouldn't be
This
that
story
way.
takes place in the UK, right? So, in the United States, I don't think this guy's getting paid for as long as he's been getting paid. But in the UK, it's possible because of some of those social safety net issues. I think in the US, this guy would have been out a long time ago. And it is weird that you like social safety net stuff is tied in to whether or not you're employed. Even now, we're talking about what was the big controversy in Congress over the last couple of weeks. It's been work requirements for benefits, right? Making sure that people are working in order to to get those sorts of benefits. But to me, it sounds a little bit like homelessness initiatives where the focus is on getting homeless people jobs instead of the actual solution, which is like they don't have a place to stay. So maybe that's the first solution. Welcome to socialism correct today on
Yeah, I was
podcast.
like, well, we really leaned into all these issues today unintentionally, because we're not normally a very political podcast. But I look at these things and kind of going back to the original article,
Mhm.
I was like, what would I like on my most gutsy day? What would I have the bravery to request? Like, what's my raise after 15 years request on my job? I don't know. Do you have anything like that, Scott?
What like additional benefit I would go after? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like what's your moonshot ask on the workplace? Like, I don't want one promotion. I want 3 promotions,
Oh,
Like, what is it?
I don't know. Like if I think back at like my career, like I've been lucky enough that 5 years ago, like things now look way better than I even had dreamt of they looked back then. So like
Yeah.
I'm sure that 5 years from now, hopefully, knock on wood, things are gonna look even better than what I anticipate right now. But I'm one of these probably rare people that I'm incredibly happy. I love what I do. I love the people I work with like super smart people.
Scott's bosses listen to the podcast, just saying.
But yeah, my boss is right next to me at this next desk. So I
That's
gotta.
great. Way to go,
I
Scott's
can
boss.
not really. No, hey, I don't know. There's a lot of like basic things. Like I really believe that your experience at the office or in your job largely relates to the 5 to 10 people around you. If you can get those people right and they're awesome, including your boss, you're gonna have a really good time. If they suck, you're gonna have a really shitty time. No matter how good like the company culture is, or the benefits for that matter.
Well, it
Yeah,
sounds
well-
like that's like a really good predictor of success in the workplace, Scott. Is there a good predictor of success in college?
Oh, you went a different direction. You went a different direction. So you two are both professors. Cole, you've taught at like TCU, right? You've
I've
professed?
taught at Louisiana Tech, TCU, and SMU, and I'm teaching. I don't think I've announced this on the podcast. I'm teaching at University of Texas at Dallas this fall. I'm teaching their people analytics course as well.
So I'll take those. I was correct that you taught at TCU. Just
Yes, I did.
I didn't know you'd done it all those places. That's fantastic. But this was it's kind of an older study, but that's okay. Meta-analysis of the relationship between college attendance and grades. And what they found is that classroom attendance is the best predictor of grades, better than any other known predictor, including SAT, high school GPA, studying habits, and study skills. Also, mandatory attendance only has a marginal effect. It is positive, but only a marginal effect. But this is like really kind of interesting stuff here that just actually showing up to class and hearing what the professor has to say, the best predictor that they can find beyond SAT, which I just kind of like shorthand say IQ when you talk about SAT test.
I would actually say that it's not what the professor says, which I probably shouldn't say that because, part of one of my jobs is a professor. So I should be like, my words are the most important thing that students hear. But I do think that attendance actually involved a couple of other things. So like life stability, right, or organizational ability. So students that can show up to class. I'm sure Gordon has stories like this where you have students that they can't show up to class, and sometimes it's because they don't want to, but especially for the type of students I work with, a lot of times it's because they have other life stuff happening. And so sometimes being able to attend class indicates that level of like outside life stability. So there aren't other things that are getting in the way. You're not like doing childcare or doing elder care, or you're not getting sick, or you're not having car trouble, or you're not having other problems.
Working a third job.
Yeah, exactly. So like that, level of attendance can kind of indicate that like, they're able to make it to class consistently, or sometimes it could just be that they're organized enough to organize their time that they can actually show up, which is, one of those things that you see a lot in undergrad courses where students are not able to like manage their time, manage their schedule, figure out when they should go to things. And if they can do that, then they can manage other things like assignments and study time. And so that's, when I was thinking about this, I was like, that seems to be a reason why that predicts so well.
Yeah, I had a few things I took away from this, Scott. One was friend of the podcast, Marcus Corday, was the lead author on it, which I didn't really notice when we originally decided to talk about this. But there were two other things that I thought were really interesting. One is they kind of alluded to the fact that it didn't seem like SAT scores and class attendance were at all correlated. And so like they're kind of independent factors of one another, which I would have thought the two were related, but I guess they're not. The other is, and if I was looking at this through the lens of like a really mediocre student who's just trying to do the bare minimum to get by, it looks like, according to their data, you only need to show up to 60% of classes to be a C student on average. And so just giving that public service announcement out there to all the mediocre students who are listening, just show up 60% of the time, and more often than not, you'll be fine with your 70 or above.
All opinions are cold.
If you are assessing it correctly is the issue. So there's the phrase C's get degrees, but C's don't get degrees if you didn't correctly estimate what you need to get a C. That's the problem. Is you're assuming
all I heard you say was 60% of the time it works every time.
Every time.
That's all I heard.
That's what that movie was referencing when they came up with, what was that? That was Anchorman, wasn't it?
Anchorman.
That's what Anchorman was referencing, was Marcus Corday's study
on how to pass
college.
I do remember calling Marcus the Sex Panther, so that's he's my former grad school professor, so I don't know if he'll appreciate that I'm making jokes about him on podcasts, but who cares?
The study skills like really surprised me because in of one, my own reflection, I would show up to class very well my freshman and sophomore year, but it wasn't until I figured out how to actually study. I was doing a bunch of stupid things, honestly. But once I figured out how to study, like everything like kind of clicked and came together. Hell, I wish I could go back now. I would dominate undergrad.
Get a degree, ULM. We're doing that. You want a degree in?
They have a big water skiing facility right on campus, right?
We have
a major water skiing.
Done it here. Water ski. We've got multiple degrees. unmanned aircraft management systems. You want to do drones, man? Agribusiness,
Maybe I'll get a
marketing
degree in
management.
IO.
We don't have IO at ULM, but
Oh,
You
risk
could
management,
study
insurance.
leadership under Gordon.
Sure.
There you
I
go.
teach one class on leadership. You can take that a few times. You'll learn something.
There you go. There you go. Pile up the credits. Back to the social nature. We got one final thing: the Marvel Comics social network analysis. This is old, but I thought you guys get a kick out of it. Essentially, this guy created the Marvel comic universe through co-occurrence in comic books, not the movies, as it were. They use Python, and it is rather antiquated package, but that's okay. But it's just amazing how many characters there are. How many characters there are in the entire Marvel universe, and they actually reduced that network based on degree, number of connections between folks. They found overall that Spider-Man, Captain America, and Thor had 3 big chunks of the network, but the biggest influencer, the biggest connector connecting different groups, was the Beast, because of their link between the X-Men and the Avengers. Yeah, pretty cool finding. Pretty cool finding.
Is expected.
Is it?
Well, the Beast is part of one of the best Avenger teams, man. He should be an Avenger. He doesn't need to be on the X-Men. It's common knowledge to me.
Gordon coming with
3
the
people.
hot takes.
Drafted by the wrong team.
This is so funny because Gordon and I were talking about how some comic fans were looking at Avengers, like runs of Avengers, and like rating them as their favorite when they were ignoring the one with Beast, actually, when he started. And Beast is also a part of like one of the better X-Men spinoff teams, X Factor, right? So he's in a lot of stuff. The really interesting thing in that study actually is like they wanted to look at time, and some characters like the Thing and Spider-Man were in these comics that were kind of like ones where they're team up books, like Marvel Team Up or Marvel 2-in-1. So it would have been interesting to see what it looked like, what the network looks like over time during the runs of those comics, because I think the Thing and Spider-Man might have gained a little bit on Beast during those time periods when that comic was getting published.
It'd be interesting if they did this during the actual movies. I know this was during the comic books, but yeah, it's essentially updated for today's audience as well. During the pandemic, I endeavored in a project to map the entire Star Trek universe, at least the first season of each series, and see how they interconnected. And the most important node in the network, in fact, it was so important I had to take it out, was computer. Everyone pings the computer, and it tied the entire network together. But I think we're kind of converging on that now. Like everyone types into Chat GPT and Google and what have you. That's our version of computer.
You want to know how out of touch I am with this article? I was reading through it, and in one of the charts, it had 2 characters, which I didn't know at the time. I thought there were one that were close together. It was Human Torch and Thing. And I read it as Human Torch Thing. And I was like, I don't remember that character.
What's your favorite character, Cole?
Out of like all of the... See, I'll be honest, until I read this article, I didn't know the 2 universes were related. I used to love X-Men, and I have like the Avengers series. I didn't know they were the same universe. And so I always liked Wolverine from the X-Men. I always thought he was really cool when I was a kid. And then I am probably on the Avengers. I do kind of like the humor behind Groot. Groot's a good one. He's a good character.
Did you just say Groot? Is that his bit?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
It's
I
like
that.
You can't beat it. He's got a tagline and he's sticking with it.
I've always been a Silver Surfer guy. I like the Silver Surfer. Seems like
didn't they make him a villain later though?
He's like a quasi villain, right?
He starts as a villain because he's working with like a character called Galactus that eats planets, and eventually becomes a good guy.
So does Galactus, kind of, but not most of the time.
Well, Gordon, I actually had one more thing for you. Because we had talked about you published an article with Sai about gig work and how it was related to the ASA, or the Attraction Selection Attrition Framework. And I just had a question. I was curious about you guys' perspectives on this. There's been this kind of meta trend recently about deconstructing jobs and work and bringing it down to just a skill-based level. And
Mhm.
gig work is cited as a continuation of that trend in relationship. And my viewpoint on this, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, is that I feel like that trend of like deconstructing work is actually kind of like unhumanistic in the sense that people derive a lot of purpose and meaning and continuity in their lives from jobs. And so I'm wondering, through your research on gig work, have you seen that? Is gig work less or more humanistic in the sense of what's going on? And I don't know, what are your reactions to that kind of framing of the question?
I'd agree overall. I do think this is part of the meta trend from all the way back to scientific management and Taylorism, right? The whole idea back then was you had these craft workers and they do make one item, they make the whole thing, they're experts, and various efficiency experts like Taylor breaking it down into very easy things that anybody can, anyone can do, with Ford Motors kind of breaking that up the most. I think gig has brought in another level of that because, one, we don't need local experts anymore. We can just, if you look at Amazon Mechanical Turk, you have people that can translate stuff. You don't need a great translator. You just need some dude on MTurk that kind of knows French to take care of it for you. And I think it's true for a lot of other stuff too. Now you've got so many people competing, and how do you build a website, or how do you create a code, or how do you create a marketing campaign? And so it both reduces the amount of potential value of these specialized skills, but also makes it so now you're competing with, even if you have the specialized skills, you're competing with a whole host of other people, especially because some content, it doesn't have to be good, it has to be acceptable, which I think you see for stuff like BuzzFeed is actually, won Pulitzers and stuff. But the BuzzFeed setup of 10 of this thing, or optimization of search, has meant you can kind of use stuff like Chat GPT to just go out with content that is good enough, that shows up high on Google, not that it's great content. And so I think gig work certainly has that potential to really, dehumanize work in various ways. Certainly there's the benefits of, you can work remotely a lot easier than the past. So there's people that, they're making their life through gig work when before they didn't really have a good option. And so I think it's a complicated issue. I do think they're employees, really, and probably should get appropriate benefits. And that's part of the value of gig, is if we pretend someone's not a real full-time employee, we don't have to pay their insurance. We don't have to care when they get an injury and can't work for 15 years. You just leave them in the gig pool and don't worry about it. So I do think there's definitely an issue with that. It's not surprising ultimately that technology advances here have led to de-skilling work in many ways, or reducing the amount that skill has that. You see that right now with the writer's strike, right? What do? Well, maybe Chat GPT can write, SNL for us and stuff like that. Again, the tech to try to replace the unique elements that give labor power.
Yeah, just to bring that back to the model that we proposed, one of the reasons that we liked bringing in this organizing piece is because gig workers are organizing, and the fact is that many things that we take for granted now came about through, not because organizations were like, oh, we want to give this to you, but through labor organizing. I mean, a weekend doesn't exist without labor organizing. 40-hour work week doesn't exist.
The weekend side.
Well, of course, if you're a gig worker, no weekend for you, right? So all of those things have to be negotiated, and labor,
heard it
for
here
a long time.
first.
The pendulum has
Hashtag
swung.
ban the weekend.
There
we go. I mean the singer, not the actress.
I like the
There we go.
singer too.
There we go. I'm
don't
just
want
trying to
Solid
save myself.
save. Solid save. Well, Cy, Gordon, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We've covered a lot of ground. Super happy about your new book, and it's been a pleasure talking to you all.
Yeah.
I'll
Thank you
have
all
a good
so
time.
much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and two guests today, Gordon Schmidt and Sai Islam. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Have a good one.
As always, all opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott.